He was 17 years old when the President of the United States pinned the Medal of Honor to his chest. But the decision that brought him to that moment lasted only 2 seconds. 2 seconds in a trench on a volcanic island in the Pacific. 2 seconds when a teenage boy saw 2 grenades land among his brothers and made a choice that would define the rest of his life. This is not a story about heroism. This is a story about a decision, and the price one boy paid for it every single day until his last breath. Jacklyn Harold Lucas was 14 years old when he walked into the recruiting station in Norfolk, Virginia, in the summer of 1942. The world was on fire. Pearl Harbor still smoldered in the national memory. Young men lined up by the thousands to enlist, their faces bright with the peculiar mix of patriotism and naivety that war has always demanded. Jack Lucas stood among them, but he was not a young man. He was a child. A child who had forged his mother's signature on the consent forms. A child who had added 3 years to his birth date. A child who looked the recruiter in the eye and lied without hesitation, because the truth would have kept him from the only thing he wanted, to fight. He was big for his age, nearly 6 feet tall, with broad shoulders that made the lie plausible. His voice had already dropped. His hands were large and calloused from farm work. The recruiter, overwhelmed by the flood of bodies and paperwork, glanced at the documents, glanced at the boy, and stamped them approved. Just like that, Jacklyn Lucas became a United States Marine. He did not feel guilt. He felt triumph. Boot camp at Paris Island was everything he had imagined and worse. The drill instructors screamed until their faces turned purple. They ran the recruits into the sand until legs buckled and lungs burned. They broke boys down to nothing and rebuilt them into something harder. Jack Lucas absorbed it all. He was strong. He was fast. He was angry in the way that only a 14-year-old boy trying to prove himself can be angry. He wanted to be the best. He wanted to be chosen. He wanted, more than anything, to go to war. But the Marine Corps discovered the truth. Someone checked the dates more carefully. Someone made a phone call. Someone realized that Private Lucas was not 17, not even 16, but 14 years old. They could not send him to combat. Regulations were clear. He was reassigned to guard duty at the Marine barracks in Hawaii. It was a safe posting, a necessary posting, a posting that felt to Jack Lucas like a prison sentence. He stood watch while other Marines shipped out. He cleaned rifles that would never fire in anger. He marched in formations that led nowhere. Around him, the war raged across the Pacific. Islands with names he could barely pronounce became battlefields. Guadalcanal, Tarawa, Saipan, Peleliu. Men he had trained with died on beaches he would never see. Every night he lay in his bunk and burned with frustration. He had lied to get into the Marines. Now he would lie again to get into the war. In January of 1945, the 14th Marine Regiment prepared to ship out from Hawaii. Their destination was classified, but everyone knew. The scuttlebutt ran through the barracks like electricity. Iwo Jima, a tiny volcanic island 8 square miles in size, sitting 660 miles south of Tokyo. The Japanese had fortified it with 21,000 troops dug into caves and tunnels. The Marines would have to take it, and they would have to pay for it in blood. Jack Lucas made his decision. He would be on that ship. He did not ask permission. He knew what the answer would be. Instead, he simply walked aboard the USS Jewel with the other Marines, carrying his rifle and his pack as if he belonged there. No one stopped him. No one questioned him. In the chaos of embarkation, one more Marine was just another body. He found a spot below decks, wedged himself between other men, and waited for the ship to sail. When it did, he allowed himself a grim smile. He was going to war. The voyage took weeks. The ship cut through gray Pacific waters under gray Pacific skies. Men slept in shifts, packed together so tightly that the air below decks became thick and rancid with sweat and seasickness. They played cards. They wrote letters they might never send. They cleaned their weapons over and over, checking and rechecking mechanisms that did not need checking. They did not talk much about what was coming. They did not need to. Every man aboard knew that some of them would not come back. Jack Lucas was discovered 3 days into the voyage. An officer doing a roll call noticed a name that should not have been there. Lucas was pulled from the ranks and brought before the ship's commander. He stood at attention while they yelled at him. Stowaway, unauthorized absence, direct violation of orders. He could be court-martialed. He could be sent to the brig. He could be dishonorably discharged. Jack Lucas listened to it all and said nothing. What could he say? He had done what he had done. And the ship was already at sea. They could not send him back now. In the end, they assigned him to a rifle company. 5th Division, 26th Marines, 1st Battalion, Company C. If he wanted to fight so badly, they would let him fight. But they made it clear, if he survived, there would be consequences. Jack Lucas did not care about consequences. He cared about proving that he belonged. He was 16 years old, though his papers said otherwise. He stood on the deck of the transport ship as the island of Iwo Jima came into view on the morning of February 19th, 1945, and he saw hell waiting for him. Iwo Jima rose from the ocean like a scar. Black volcanic sand beaches, steep terraces climbing toward the center of the island where Mount Suribachi loomed, a dormant volcano that the Japanese had turned into a fortress. The entire island stank of sulfur. Even from the ship, miles offshore, the men could smell it, a rotten egg reek that clung to the back of the throat. The bombardment had been going on for days. Naval guns fired shells the size of cars into the island, trying to soften the defenses. But everyone knew it would not be enough. The Japanese were not on the surface. They were below it, dug into tunnels and bunkers and caves, waiting. The Marines loaded into the Higgins boats in the pre-dawn darkness. Jack Lucas climbed down the cargo net with the others, his rifle slung across his back, his pack heavy with ammunition and rations. The landing craft bobbed in the swells, rising and falling. Men mistimed their jumps and fell into the water. Others were crushed between the boat and the ship's hull. The Navy corpsmen fished them out, but some did not come up. The war had not even started yet, and men were already dying. The run to the beach took 30 minutes. 30 minutes of diesel fumes and salt spray and the metallic taste of fear. The men sat shoulder to shoulder, silent now, their faces pale beneath their helmets. Some prayed, some stared at nothing. Jack Lucas gripped his rifle and tried to control his breathing. This was what he had wanted. This was what he had lied for twice. But now that it was here, now that the beach was visible through the morning haze, he felt something he had not expected. Not fear exactly, but the understanding that he might die in the next hour, and there was nothing he could do about it. The ramp dropped. The noise hit them like a physical force. Explosions, machine gun fire, men screaming. The Marines poured out of the boat and into the water, wading toward the beach through chest-deep surf. Jack Lucas moved with them, his boots sinking into the soft volcanic sand underwater. The beach was chaos. Bodies floated in the surf. Destroyed landing craft burned on the waterline. Craters pocked the sand where mortar rounds had landed, and everywhere the sound. A constant roar of violence that drowned out thought. The sand was the worst part. It was not sand, not really. It was volcanic ash, black and fine as powder. It gave way under every step. Men struggled up the beach, sinking to their ankles, sometimes to their knees. They could not run. They could only trudge forward, painfully slow, while the Japanese fired down on them from the high ground. The Marines died in groups. A mortar round would land and 3 men would simply cease to exist. A machine gun would open up and a line of bodies would fall like dominoes. Jack Lucas kept moving because there was nothing else to do. Stop and you die. Move forward and you might die. But at least you were doing something. Company C pushed inland, slowly, yard by yard. They used flamethrowers to burn out pillboxes. They used satchel charges to collapse tunnel entrances. They fired rifles and threw grenades and called in artillery strikes that landed so close the concussion knocked men off their feet. By nightfall, they had advanced less than a mile. They dug foxholes in the volcanic ash and waited for the counterattack that everyone knew was coming. It came after midnight. Waves of Japanese soldiers charging out of the darkness, screaming, some armed only with bayonets. The Marines fired until their rifle barrels glowed red. In the morning, the bodies were piled so thick in front of the Marine lines that bulldozers had to clear them away. Jack Lucas had not slept. He had not eaten. He had fired his rifle so many times that his shoulder was bruised purple from the recoil. But he was still alive. That was all that mattered. He was still alive, and the Marines were still moving forward. February 20th dawned gray and cold. The Marines advanced toward the airfield, the primary objective. The Japanese contested every foot. Snipers fired from hidden positions. Artillery rounds fell without warning. The volcanic ash was in everything. Eyes, mouths, lungs, weapons. It clogged rifle mechanisms. It turned sweat into black paste. It coated the dead until they looked like statues carved from obsidian. Jack Lucas moved through this landscape like a man in a nightmare, one foot in front of the other, his mind numb with exhaustion and adrenaline. They were advancing through a network of trenches when it happened. Jack Lucas and 3 other Marines moved along a shallow trench, their rifles ready, their eyes scanning for movement. The trench curved ahead. They could not see what was around the bend. Standard procedure. One man goes forward, checks, signals the others. But before they could move, they heard it. Voices, Japanese voices, close, very close. Jack Lucas looked at the other Marines. Their eyes met. No words were needed. Enemy soldiers were in the next trench, maybe 20 feet away, separated only by a low wall of volcanic rock and sandbags. The Marines crept forward, slowly, silently. They reached the curve and looked over. 11 Japanese soldiers, packed into the parallel trench, some reloading rifles, some eating, one smoking a cigarette. They had not seen the Marines yet. For a single frozen moment, both groups stared at each other across 15 feet of empty air. Then everything happened at once. The Japanese soldiers shouted. They reached for their weapons. The Marines opened fire. The noise in the confined space was deafening. Rifle rounds ricocheted off rock. A grenade exploded somewhere behind them. Men screamed in Japanese and English. Jack Lucas fired his rifle, the muzzle flashing, the spent casings ejecting and clinking against the stone. He saw a Japanese soldier fall. He saw another raise a rifle. He fired again. And then he saw them. 2 grenades, arcing through the air, thrown by a Japanese soldier who was already falling, already dying, but who had managed to pull the pins and throw. 2 grenades, tumbling end over end, landing in the trench 3 feet from where Jack Lucas stood, landing between him and the 3 Marines behind him. Time did not slow down. That is a myth, but perception sharpened. In the space between one heartbeat and the next, Jack Lucas saw everything with perfect clarity. The grenades were Type 97 fragmentation grenades, smaller than American grenades but just as deadly. They had a 4-second fuse. Maybe 3 seconds had already passed, maybe less. The grenades lay on the volcanic sand, still rocking slightly from the impact. Behind him, the 3 Marines were frozen, their eyes wide, their mouths open. They had seen the grenades. They knew what was about to happen. In 1 more second, the grenades would detonate. The fragmentation would tear through all 4 of them. They would die together in this trench on this island, and no one would remember their names. Jack Lucas made his decision. He did not think about it. There was no time to think. He simply moved. He dove forward, his body horizontal, his arms outstretched. He landed on top of the grenades, his chest and stomach covering them completely. He tucked the grenades under his body and pressed himself into the volcanic sand and waited for the explosion. It came. Both grenades detonated simultaneously, the blast muffled by his body. The force lifted him off the ground and slammed him back down. The pain was immediate and absolute. It was not pain in any conventional sense. It was erasure. His chest cavity filled with fire, his ribs shattered. His left arm, which had been tucked beneath him, simply ceased to exist as a functional limb. Shrapnel tore through his stomach, his intestines, his liver. One piece of metal, half the size of a thumb, lodged itself against his spine. Another punctured his lung. A third severed an artery in his thigh. He could not breathe. He could not see. He could not process what had happened. His body went into shock instantly, shutting down everything non-essential to keep him alive for a few more seconds. The 3 Marines behind him were untouched. The blast had been directed downward and outward, but Jack Lucas had absorbed most of it. One Marine had caught some shrapnel in his leg, but it was superficial. The other 2 were completely unharmed. They stared at the body on the ground, not understanding at first. Then they understood. Jack Lucas had thrown himself on 2 grenades. He had saved their lives, and now he was dead. Except he was not dead. Not yet. His heart was still beating, though it should not have been. His lungs were collapsed, but some small amount of air was still getting through. His blood pressure had dropped so low that he should have lost consciousness immediately, but he had not. He was aware. He could hear voices. He could feel hands on him, rolling him over. He could feel the pain, a distant roaring thing that threatened to consume him. Someone was shouting for a corpsman. Someone was pressing bandages against his chest. Someone was telling him to hold on, just hold on. The medics are coming. The Navy corpsman arrived within minutes. He took one look at Jack Lucas and knew it was hopeless. No one survived injuries like this. The entire front of the boy's body was torn open. His uniform was shredded and soaked with blood. Bone fragments were visible through the wounds. The corpsman did what he could. He applied pressure bandages. He injected morphine. But he was already moving on in his mind, already thinking about the next wounded Marine, the one who might actually survive. He marked Jack Lucas as expectant. That was the term. Expectant. Expected to die. They left him on a stretcher at the side of the trench and moved on. Jack Lucas lay there for 6 hours. 6 hours under the pale winter sun of Iwo Jima. 6 hours listening to the battle rage around him. 6 hours hovering in that gray space between life and death. He drifted in and out of consciousness. When he was awake, the pain was unbearable. When he was unconscious, he dreamed of home. He dreamed of his mother. He dreamed of the farm in North Carolina where he had grown up, the smell of tobacco fields in the summer, the sound of cicadas at dusk. He dreamed of being 14 again, standing in the recruiting station, signing his name to papers that would lead him here. A different corpsman found him late in the afternoon. The corpsman was checking bodies, looking for identification tags, when he noticed that Jack Lucas was still breathing. Barely, but breathing. The corpsman shouted for stretcher bearers. They loaded Jack Lucas onto a stretcher and carried him back through the trenches, through the volcanic ash, down to the beach where the aid station had been set up. The journey took 2 hours. Every step sent fresh waves of agony through his destroyed body. He passed out halfway there. The stretcher bearers thought he had died, but when they set him down at the aid station, a doctor checked his pulse and found it. Faint, thready, but there. They loaded him onto a landing craft that evening and evacuated him to the USS Samaritan, a hospital ship anchored offshore. The Samaritan's operating rooms ran 24 hours a day, processing the endless stream of wounded Marines coming from the island. The surgeons worked in assembly line fashion: triage, stabilize, operate, move to the next patient. Jack Lucas went into surgery within an hour of arriving on the ship. The surgeons opened his chest and stared at the damage. It was catastrophic. His left lung was shredded. 3 ribs were completely gone. His diaphragm was torn in half. Shrapnel was embedded in nearly every major organ. One of the surgeons counted over 200 separate pieces of metal, some as large as a coin, others microscopic. It was impossible. No one could survive this. But Jack Lucas was still alive. His heart was still beating, so they kept working. The surgery lasted 8 hours. They removed what shrapnel they could, but most of it was too deep, too embedded in vital tissue. Removing it would kill him, so they left it. They sewed his organs back together as best they could. They transfused 14 pints of blood into him, replacing nearly his entire blood volume. They closed him up and moved him to the recovery ward and did not expect him to make it through the night. He made it through the night, and the next night, and the night after that. His body, for reasons the doctors could not explain, refused to die. His fever spiked to 105 degrees. Infections ravaged his surgical wounds. He developed pneumonia in his remaining functional lung. He went into septic shock twice. Each time, the doctors prepared his death certificate. Each time, he pulled through. After 2 weeks, one of the surgeons stood at his bedside and said out loud what everyone was thinking. "You should be dead. I do not know why you are not dead, but you are not dead." Jack Lucas spent 3 months on the USS Samaritan. He underwent 6 more surgeries. They amputated 2 fingers on his left hand that had turned necrotic. They removed portions of his intestines that had been too damaged to repair. They grafted skin from his thighs to cover the wounds on his chest. He lost 60 pounds. His hair fell out from the fever and the trauma. When he was finally stable enough to transfer, they flew him to Naval Hospital in San Diego. He spent another year there, undergoing surgery after surgery, trying to rebuild a body that would never be whole again. While Jack Lucas fought for his life in a hospital bed, the Marine Corps faced a problem. Private Lucas had been absent without leave when he boarded the ship to Iwo Jima. Technically, he was a deserter. Technically, he should be court-martialed. But he had also thrown himself on 2 grenades and saved 3 Marines. His company commander recommended him for the Medal of Honor. The paperwork made its way up the chain of command. Generals and admirals read the account of what had happened in that trench and made their decision. The charges were dropped. The recommendation was approved. On October 5, 1945, 17-year-old Private First Class Jacklyn H. Lucas stood in the East Room of the White House. He wore his dress blues. His chest was covered with bandages beneath the uniform. He walked with a cane because his left leg had been so badly damaged that it would never fully heal. President Harry S. Truman stood before him, holding the Medal of Honor, the highest military decoration awarded by the United States government. The president read the citation aloud, "For conspicuous gallantry and intrepidity at the risk of his life above and beyond the call of duty." Then he placed the medal around Jack Lucas's neck and shook his hand. Photographers' flashbulbs popped. Reporters scribbled in their notebooks. Jack Lucas stood at attention and tried not to pass out from the pain. He was the youngest Marine to ever receive the Medal of Honor. He was famous. His photograph appeared in newspapers across the country. People called him a hero. Parades were held in his honor. Strangers stopped him on the street to shake his hand, and Jack Lucas hated all of it. He did not feel like a hero. He felt like a boy who had made a stupid decision and somehow survived it. He felt like a fraud. He had not thought about saving his friends when he jumped on those grenades. He had simply reacted. There had been no nobility in it, no grand calculation. Just instinct and adrenaline and a split-second choice that could just as easily have gone another way. The years after the war were not kind to Jack Lucas. He tried to return to normal life, but there was nothing normal left. The shrapnel in his body made every movement painful. He could not run. He could not lift anything heavy. He could not sleep on his left side because the pressure on his ribs was unbearable. The Veterans Administration gave him a disability rating of 100%, which meant they considered him completely incapable of work. He was 18 years old. He enrolled in high school trying to get the education he had missed when he enlisted at 14. He was a grown man sitting in classes with children, a Medal of Honor recipient learning algebra. The other students stared at him. The teachers did not know how to treat him. He lasted one semester before dropping out. He tried college next, enrolling at a small school in North Carolina. That lasted 2 semesters. He could not concentrate. The shrapnel in his body shifted when he moved, causing sudden sharp pains that made him gasp in the middle of lectures. His classmates thought he was strange, damaged. They were right. In 1951, desperate for purpose, Jack Lucas did something that shocked everyone who knew him. He joined the United States Army. The Marines would not take him back because of his injuries, but the Army was less strict. He completed parachute training and became a member of the 82nd Airborne Division. It was insane. He could barely walk without pain, and he was jumping out of airplanes. But he did it because he needed to prove to himself more than anyone that he was still whole, that the war had not broken him completely. During a training jump in 1953, his parachute failed to open properly. He fell 3,000 feet and hit the ground at terminal velocity. The impact should have killed him. It did not. He broke both arms. He fractured his pelvis. He dislocated his shoulder. But he lived. The doctors at the Army hospital could not believe it. This man had survived 2 grenades exploding against his chest, and now he had survived a parachute failure. One doctor looked at his medical file, looked at him and said, "You cannot die. I do not think you are capable of dying." But dying was exactly what Jack Lucas was doing slowly over the course of decades. The shrapnel in his body was killing him by degrees. Over 200 pieces of metal, rusting slowly inside his organs. His liver began to fail in the 1960s. His kidneys followed in the 1970s. He underwent dozens of surgeries over the years, doctors trying to remove pieces of shrapnel that had shifted into dangerous positions. But they could never remove all of it. It was too deep, too embedded. Removing it would require destroying the organs it had lodged in. He married, he divorced, he married again. He tried to be a good husband, a good father, but the pain made him irritable and distant. He struggled with depression. He struggled with what would later be called post-traumatic stress disorder, though in his day they simply called it being damaged. He had nightmares about Iwo Jima. He woke up screaming, his sheets soaked with sweat, his wife trying to calm him down. In his dreams, he was always back in that trench, always diving for the grenades, always waiting for the explosion that would kill him this time. The Veterans Administration increased his disability benefits over the years as his health deteriorated. By the 1990s, he was on dozens of medications just to manage the pain and keep his failing organs functioning. He could no longer walk without assistance. He spent most of his days in a wheelchair or in bed. He was 68 years old, but his body was ancient, worn out by decades of slow destruction from within. In 2008, the United States Navy announced that a new Arleigh Burke-class guided missile destroyer would be named the USS Jack H. Lucas, in honor of his actions on Iwo Jima. It was the first United States warship named for a Medal of Honor recipient from World War II who was still living. Jack Lucas attended the announcement ceremony in a wheelchair, his body frail, his hands shaking. He listened to admirals and politicians talk about his courage, his sacrifice, his heroism. He listened to them say that his name would sail the oceans for decades to come, a symbol of everything that was best about the United States Marine Corps. And he sat there and said nothing, because what could he say? that he had been a stupid kid who made a stupid decision, that he had spent 63 years paying for those 2 seconds in a trench. That some nights he wished the grenades had killed him, because then at least it would be over. Jack Lucas died on June 27, 2008, at his home in Hattiesburg, Mississippi. He was 80 years old. The official cause of death was leukemia, but the truth was that the shrapnel had finally finished the job the grenades had started. His body had been fighting a war for 63 years, and it had finally lost. He was buried with full military honors at Bailey National Cemetery in North Carolina. Marines carried his casket. A bugler played taps. A rifle salute cracked through the summer air. The Medal of Honor lay on a pillow beside his casket, the ribbon faded from decades of wear. In the end, Jacklyn H. Lucas was remembered not for the wars he survived, not for the parachute failure, not for the decades of pain. He was remembered for 2 seconds. 2 seconds when a 16-year-old boy saw 2 grenades and made a decision that 3 other men would live. That was his legacy. Not the medal, though the medal was important. Not the ship, though the ship would carry his name for decades. His legacy was 3 men who went home to their families. 3 men who had children and grandchildren and great-grandchildren, who existed because Jack Lucas decided, in the space between 2 heartbeats, that their lives were worth more than his own. It was not a decision he made consciously. He did not have time to weigh the options, to consider the consequences, to think about the future he was giving up. He simply saw the grenades and he moved. That was all. 2 seconds of instinct and adrenaline, and whatever indefinable quality makes one person throw themselves on a grenade while another person runs. Courage, maybe, or stupidity, or just youth and anger and a 16-year-old certainty that they are invincible. Whatever it was, it defined the rest of his life. Every day of pain, every surgery, every nightmare, every moment when he looked in the mirror and saw a body destroyed by his own decision. It all traced back to those 2 seconds in a trench on a volcanic island in the Pacific. The 3 Marines he saved went home. They married. They had families. They lived full lives that would have ended in that trench if not for Jack Lucas. Their children never knew how close they came to not existing. Their grandchildren never heard the story of the teenage Marine who made a decision measured in heartbeats. But they existed, and their existence was Jack Lucas's real legacy. Not the medal, not the ship, not the ceremonies and the parades and the photographs in history books. His legacy was life. Life that continued because he decided, for 2 seconds, that other people's futures were worth more than his own. That is the story. Not of a hero, though he was called that. Not of a saint, though he was treated like one. But of a boy who became a man in the space between seeing 2 grenades and hitting the ground. A boy who paid for that decision with every breath he took for the next 63 years. A boy who proved that courage is not the absence of fear, but the willingness to act in spite of it. A boy who showed that sometimes the most important decisions we make are the ones we do not have time to think about. If you found this story moving, if you felt the weight of those 2 seconds, then please take a moment to subscribe to this channel and share this story with others. History is not just dates and battles. It is people. It is decisions. It is the moment when one person looks at 2 grenades and chooses to fall forward instead of run. Leave a comment below and tell me, what would you have done in that trench? Do you think courage can be taught, or is it something we discover only when tested? And most importantly, remember Jack Lucas. Remember the price he paid. Remember that freedom is not free, and that sometimes it costs everything a person has to give.